there was a Victory Day parade, as there is every year, but each year we're starting to see it get slightly more dystopian. Now that's already pretty hard to do considering it's a Victory Day parade and Soviet nostalgia is turned up to 110%. And it's not just, yay, we beat the Nazis, it's more militaristic and more militaristic and more militaristic every year. And this year, it seemed to increase that trend outside of the fact that the military was noticeably less present. And that's not to say that there weren't soldiers marching, that's not to say that there weren't military vehicles. It's just, for example, there was only one tank. And that one tank was this ceremonial tank right here, the T-34 that is there at every Victory Day march in order to, you know, commemorate the ceremonies. And it carries the Victory Day banner, which is, I believe, a recreation. I don't believe it's the actual banner, but a recreation of the banner that was held over Moscow after the Soviets took over the city, and then they did like a pose in front of the in front of the Reichstag. No, I'd say the flag they put over the Moscow. The flag they put over the Reichstag when they've taken Berlin. It wasn't right after they won. It was a little bit after they won the Reichstag. I think it was like 24 hours later. So it was mostly a photo op, but it became very symbolic. And this is the tank that carried it, but it was the only tank at the whole event. And that is noticeable considering that if you were to see any of these marches, 2021 or anything pre-invasion, pre-big invasion, mind you, you would see a ton of tanks. And you see a ton of tank crews, tank after tank after tank, as Russia shows off the power of its armored fleet. But now it's mostly just BMPs, armored vehicles, and marching troops. It's a rarity to see any tanks. And for this year, there was no tanks, period. No tanks outside of this one. So that's one thing I noticed that was different from the pre-invasion big Victory Day parades. This isn't the first one that hasn't had a tank. Last year, they didn't have a tank as well. So it seems that since 2022, or no, I think in 2022 they had tanks too. Since 2023, now for the second year in a row, the Victory Day parade has been absent of tank power. Outside of that, there was also the fact that there were anti-drone guns everywhere, guarding everything, in case the Ukrainians decided that they wanted to do a big funny during the Victory Day parade and blow up some Russian military vehicles before they even got anywhere near Ukraine. The Ukrainians didn't do that, mind you, but I do think this should give you an idea as to what the Russians are expecting, as they do not believe they are safe in Moscow anymore from Ukrainian attack, which shouldn't be that surprising considering this is what happened earlier today. A Ukrainian flight aircraft. Now, when it says it's just a Ukrainian light aircraft. Sorry, I said Ukrainian flight aircraft. My brain is a simple computer. It sees words and it immediately starts reading. These are basically commercial planes. Okay, I thought there was going to be words with that, but there weren't. Thank you so much for the tier 1 sub. I appreciate it. So these are basically commercial planes that have been retrofitted into really, really big bombs, and then the Ukrainians lob them at Russia, and you'll be surprised how far these things go. They'll get past like 1,000 kilometers. In fact, the Ukrainians recently hit an oil refinery that's 1,400 kilometers away from Ukraine. That's notable considering that before the big invasion, the Ukrainians could only get bombs and missiles and do an attack 250 kilometers into Russia if they so pleased. So this is a massive expansion of their range. And so this isn't a weapon to block any of those necessarily. These are to stop the hand. Wow. Wow, okay. The whites are getting targeted once again. Charlie Kirk, where are you? Where are you defending? Where is your defense of the white race? I mean the white names in site chat. Thank you so much for the 5 gifted tier 1 subs. To 2 Dad Smooching, Pookie GG, Delary, Pound Curtis, and one other person. I appreciate that. Thank you. Look at that. We got 1 sub. We got 6 subs, I think, in total today already. That's really nice. Thank you. Melody X Rain, big supporter of the chat. Now, these are not meant to destroy any like big fixed-wing aircraft or those long UAV drones that are being sent over to do suicide bombing runs. And by what I mean by suicide bombing runs, they're kamikaze drones, basically. But these are meant to stop the smaller handheld FPV DJI drones that have been used been used en masse on the front line. So I think this would suggest that the Russians believe that they have infiltrators in Moscow from Ukraine that could possibly do an FPV drone style attack on the Victory Day parade. Now, this would suggest a lot of fear of infiltration from the Russians, but it's not completely unfounded. Many of you will remember that less than a year ago, or it's been a year, so I kind of lose track of time with the war and everything, but roughly a year ago, last time I was in the country, so like roughly a year ago, there was a big drone attack on Moscow that ended up like just burning the fringes of a flag, but it really panicked the Russians. It really made them think, man, how did they get that far? How did they do that? And it could have only been done from inside Moscow because of the style of drone that was being used. It just couldn't have traveled all the way from Ukraine to Moscow, which suggests that the Ukrainians have agents in Moscow, which is not terribly surprising, but it does show that the Russians are aware of it, they're scared of it, and they're taking precautions because of it. So outside of the drone guns and outside of the one tank, what's another difference I saw? Well, if you were to compare the crowd size of a pre-invasion Victory Day parade, and when I say the crowd size, I don't necessarily mean all the civilians standing in the crowd, but there's a crowd of soldiers that are supposed to gather for the president's speech. And if you look at a side-by-side photograph of the crowd size at today's event, and you compare it to an event, say 2021, it's like half the size. There's a lot less soldiers available for the Victory Day parade. So less tanks, fear of drones, less soldiers. That seems to be the big changes when it comes to the Victory Day parade. Everything else, I mean, it's as you would expect. It was a Victory Day parade. They did the big stomps, you know. It's not a goose step necessarily. People will get angry at me if there's a Victory Day banner. I called the other thing the Victory Day banner. I think I got that wrong. This is the actual Victory Day banner. I don't know if it's the actual Victory Day banner, but this is at least a recreation of it. But, you know, they did the marching around. They did the usual thing. They played the music. They all said, rah, rah, rah. You know, they did the whole shebang, right? I don't know what you guys expected. We're not going to watch all of it for a few reasons. The first reason is that I've seen this a million times over. The second reason is if you want to just watch the parade, you can go watch the parade yourself. There's a ton of sources on it. You don't need to go to like any Russian state outlet. There's a ton of Western outlets that have reposted it. There's not a lot of English translations of the speech, so we're going to be relying on one English translation I found online, and we're going to give credit to that. But you can go watch the whole march your own if you want to. I don't want to. I don't have that much of an interest of watching Sergei Shoigu like travel around in a car like this for 20 minutes, watch him like do like a ceremonial like wand wave, and then watch them all just march in unison for the millionth time, which we could see every other year. I'm just not that interested in watching the same thing over and over. There's Shoigu, there's the Russian defense minister zooming around. Got just one day, just one of these big parades, can these goofy general guys just fall out of the back onto the street, get marched on? Just once, just one goofy mess up, one silly mess up. The only silly mess up I saw this year was somebody dropped their shoe during the parade, and then all the other soldiers had to march over the shoe, and it was not even really funny. I didn't even chuckle. I guess the fringes of my lips went up slightly. Anyway, let's watch. Oh, whoa, was that 5 tier 1 subs from Bop and Wap in gutter chat? Now, why you did that in gutter chat and not in site chat, where you could get double the bang for your buck, I will never know. I can truly never know. But either way, I deeply appreciate your subs and your contribution, not only to the channel, but specifically to the downtrodden of those in gutter chat, of course. I appreciate it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And Bop and Wap is a longtime supporter of the channel, so I also appreciate their continued viewership and support. There was also a fake flyby. I didn't see any fake flyby. I didn't see that. I didn't see that at all. There are still white names from Vosh's community here. Vosh's community? You mean there's somebody that watches other streamers instead of me? What a terrible choice on their part. I expect that if you're not watching me live, because my stream's not on, that you're just watching continuous 24/7 repeats of all of my VODs to give me the maximum ad capacity. That's what I assume all my viewers do when I'm not live. Because when I'm not streaming, I just turn off the stream and I kind of just sit here for 24 hours until stream starts again. I don't sleep, really. I just kind of replace my Energizer batteries. You only have VODs from 2 months ago? Well, I also assumed that because you're all such diehard fans that you saved all of them. And I've just been waiting for one of you to eventually start the Dylan Burns VODs channel. Of course. Dylan, have you interacted with Jake Bro or Silicon Curtain? Stumbled on their talk today. I had one talk with Jake Bro, and I don't know what was with that conversation, but the whole conversation just felt off. And it's not Jake Bro's fault. I don't think it's necessarily my fault. I don't know whose fault is it. It just felt like we were on two completely different wavelengths in conversation. Not to say that we like disagreed on everything or something. It's just, I don't know. It just felt like we were on two different wavelengths during the talk. Anyway, let's watch the Victory Day speech by Putin. And as he makes the speech, it's going to be translated by the Russian dude on YouTube. I want to give him full credit. And the reason we're using this YouTuber's translation, along with some of his English commentary, is because I checked all the other mainstream outlets. I checked AP, I checked like some CBS affiliates, I checked, or was it an ABC affiliate? I checked all these different mainstream outlets, and none of them had an English translation. They had live stream of the march, but then it was just Putin speaking, and nobody did a live translation. Now, last year, I think it was Sky News that did a live translation. I also think AP also might have done a live translation. I forget. So I think this march was given less, let's just say, attention by the press. Maybe it was because last Victory Day parade, there was a bunch of rumors around mobilization. And this Victory Day parade, there was less rumors about mobilization. All the rumors around mobilization have just been generally about sometime after the election. I've heard some rumors. I got asked about it, but there wasn't really a lot of rumors about mobilization after this speech. So maybe that's why it's gotten less attention, but that's why we're listening to this translation, is because there's very few people, if any, translating it, and he's one of the few. So let's listen to what Putin has to say. And as we listen to what he has to say, translated by this guy, we're going to be watching the parade. Oh, well, but first, of course, Shoigu. Oh, 1 second. Let's, There we go, headphones.
Leader, the parade is ready. Putin did not look happy when shaking Shoigu's hand.
Sure, Sergei Shoigu. I've heard rumors that since this is going to be Putin's new term in power, he could technically replace Shoigu as a defense minister. And Shoigu has had a lot of failures during this war. Of course, you cannot put everything on Sergei Shoigu as a defense minister. You can put some of the blame on Gerasimov. You can put a lot of the blame on the lack of a Russian NCO. I don't want to get into all of the details. Point is, though, he certainly takes some of the blame, but I doubt that he's going to get replaced. Of course, I'm not going to make any hard predictions, because I know how it is with people making hard predictions, definitely in relation to this war. But I'll just say that one of the big things that makes me hesitant to say that he's going to get replaced now that there's an opportunity to do a replacing is the fact that Sergei Shoigu is one of Putin's most long-term allies. He is somebody who is very loyal to him. And the main question around Sergei Shoigu was never, oh, would he betray Putin? Would he betray Putin? It was, and of course, to say that these hyenas wouldn't eat each other given the opportunity, these political hyenas. I'm not saying that, just saying that he has shown a high level of loyalty. And the main question has been about Shoigu fighting with other political figures in the Russian system and jostling with each other, like his rivalry with the old Wagner chief, now the dead Wagner chief, Dmitry Prigozhin. So it's never been a question about loyalty. And so if he's loyal, considering what happened with General Armageddon and Prigozhin, he might have a reason to keep him because, I mean, if it's just slightly broke and it's loyal, might as well keep it instead of fix it. Anyway, let's continue to listen.
I mean, maybe the last parade of Shoigu, who knows? Let's see. Steven Seagal will turn up in a Hammer. Okay, here is the speech. Dear citizens of Russia, dear veterans, comrades, soldiers and navy, sergeants, captains, basically, yeah. Officers, generals, admirals, heroes of the special military operation. Congratulations with the Victory Day, with our main holiday ever, with our sacred holiday. We remember our heroes, we remember our fathers, grandfathers. They protected the motherland from Nazism. They rescued Europe. They rescued Europe from fascism. And now the truth about the Second World War is being changed by the West.
What?
Now everything is based on lies. They are they're deconstructing the real memorials for the real fascist fighters. They cancel the truth. They cancel the history, the memory of Russian soldiers.
Okay, I just want to throw something quickly out there, and I mean, oh look, it's Solenyev, Russian state media's favorite gremlin. The removal of old Soviet statues, if you talk to the people who are the biggest advocates about removing these statues, it never has to do with we're angry that the Allies won World War II, or all of the soldiers that fought the Nazis were angry that they fought the Nazis or were upset about it. Most of the removal of Soviet statues, many of them are not even in reference to World War II. It's just like, hey, here's this old Soviet scientist that botched crop rotations, or oh, here's this old Soviet soldier from not even World War II, but from the Bolshevik Revolution who, engaged in pogroms, or like it's like all sorts of statues. But there's also some World War II statues, specifically of just like individual Soviet soldiers or Soviet symbology heavily leaned into. It never has to do with necessarily the war. It has to usually do with the period preceding or following the war, and the long periods of occupation that followed the war, the brutality that followed the war, the brutality of Stalin's regime. It has to do with a bunch of other trauma that states like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Ukraine, Moldova, Poland, or all these other countries that were behind the Iron Curtain when the curtain came down, that felt the brutality in their communities. And ultimately, are these communities going to continue to pay to keep up statues that they don't
immoral,
morally corrupt, bankrupt man? Thank you for the Prime Borg fellow. I appreciate it. Are these communities going to be made to pay for statues that they do not think represents them? Statues that they see as a reminder of historical trauma that they are not big fans of? Or are they going to get rid of it and replace it with something else? Which I remember in Odessa, there was a statue of Lenin that was replaced with a statue of Darth Vader, which, I mean, you could replace it with anything. Or maybe in Ukraine, as I've seen it happen in a lot of locations, they kind of retrofit it, where they'll have the Soviet statue, but they'll paint it yellow and blue. Or they'll have the Soviet statue, but they'll have it hold a Ukrainian flag. But a lot of this is different on an individual basis. For example, in a lot of villages in Ukraine, there's still a lot of Soviet statues up because those statues commemorate fighters specifically from that village. And many of the people in those villages are like, oh, this statue has the name of my great-great-grandfather. And so this statue means something to me. It's a symbol of our fight against fascism, less a statue that represents to our village occupation. So it's different on an individual basis. But none of this has to do with fighting against the idea that the Russians participated in World War II. It has to do with a distaste for the Soviet presence in many of these countries post-World War II. And it has to do with, outside of the distaste, it has to do with the fact many of them just don't care about the Soviet Union anymore. It's a regime that's long fallen, and they don't feel like they want these reminders of the old regime. Anyway, continuing.
The sacrifice they did for life of the world. And right now it is a common goal of the West to resurrect Nazism in our neighboring countries. National fight.
I gotta say, if that's our goal, the Russians are being quite helpful with not only the sponsoring of many far-right movements throughout Europe, but also the arming of neo-Nazis like the Rusich volunteer group, which has been fighting in Ukraine since 2014. That's not even to talk about the soldiers that act Nazi-like the Russian Orthodox Army, which engaged in brutal lynchings of different religious minority groups, including evangelicals, Baptists, etc. Which, in the United States, they're not religious minorities necessarily, but in Ukraine, they certainly are.
Just fight. We do not accept this truth from no one, neither from any alliance, not from any country. Russia will do everything. Russia will do everything to prevent a global war. We will not let be threatened. We're
going to prevent a global war by invading a European country, starting the largest war in Europe since World War II, and threaten nuclear apocalypse to stop war. We must start wars to have peace, truly.
Our forces are ready. The West wants to forget the Second World War, but we remember.
Tell that to Hollywood.
We remember that the story that the future of the humankind was done in Moscow and St. Petersburg, Stalingrad, Kursk and Minsk, Smolensk. There were so complicated fights all the way from Caucasus all the way to Crimea. The Soviet Union was fighting alone against Nazism and fascists. Germany was supported by the entire Europe. Yes, that's actually what he said.
Germany was supported by the entire of Europe. Okay, so there's, if he includes the Soviet Union in Germany, there's a way that could be true. But there's something that really angers me about his call out of this Western destruction of history is his position. If his position was just, hey, the West needs to stop discounting our contribution to the Second World War, I'd be like, I don't really think there's many countries doing that, but maybe there's some people who might not properly know how much Russia gave and how much Ukraine, by the way, if we're trying to use this in reference to this war, because if we're talking about as a percentage of the population, Ukraine gave, so much. Ukraine was the center of the German Lebensraum program. It's with its black fertile soil. That was the land that they wanted to give to all of the German Volk, all the German people that were coming there to steal land, settle, and fulfill Hitler's grand dream of a grand, Nazi empire. They all bled so much, so I understand that when wanting to feel respected in that sacrifice, even though I don't understand necessarily where this anger about that sacrifice not being respected is coming from precisely right now. But you can't do that and then immediately discount everybody else's sacrifices in fighting the Nazis. The British fought the Nazis before the Soviets did. The French fought the Nazis before the Soviets did.
Morally corrupt, bankrupt man.
Thank you, Antonio Rockhound, for the tier 1 sub. The Poles fought the Nazis before the Soviets did. The Czechs fought the Nazis before the Soviets did, even if the West failed to support the Czechs in fighting the Nazis before the Soviets did, and helped sign away a lot of their freedoms. And though in the Czechs' arms industry, by giving that away to the Germans, was then used to invade Poland and invade France. With the majority of the tanks that Germany actually invaded France, I don't even think they were German. I think they were from the Czech arms industry. And this is why if you appease, you can end up just making the threat bigger, and then the potentiality, the negative outcomes from war worse, is from allowing them to absorb their neighbors. It's the same problem that, hey, if we just let Russia take over Ukraine, we're not just fighting Russia anymore. We're now fighting Russia plus the results of occupied Ukraine, which, I mean, that would be very, very bad, wouldn't it? Putting that aside, my main point here is you cannot complain about your sacrifice not being respected before then immediately disregarding everybody else's sacrifices.
We remember the sacrifice of every anti-Hitler soldier. Partisans, diversion groups, Chinese soldiers, Chinese who were fighting against Japan. He almost cried. We will never forget our common fight of Soviet Union, dear friends. Russia is going through extremely difficult times right now. The history, the future, it all depends on us. Today, in the Victory Day, today we realize this more than ever. And we want to be just like our ancestors. We are ready to overcome any difficulties, obstacles. We need to find the faith in ourselves, in our country. And we need to love our motherland. We celebrate victory.
It would be, I mean, I think a lot of those hard times would probably be reduced if you just kind of left Ukraine, right? Like, I'm going through a lot of pain right now, and you see the person in the corner just cutting their wrists. It's like, well, I have one suggestion. I don't know if you're going to listen to it.
Day during special military operation. All of its participants, especially the ones who are on the front lines, are our new heroes. We cheer for your sacrifice. We respect your sacrifice. Everyone loves you, everyone believes in you, everyone is worried for you.
Look, I know that was in reference to something totally different, but when he said that, that reminded me of, like, everyone loves you. You did great. It reminds me of Trump talking to the J6 protesters. You're very special. Sorry. It's not the same, but it just gave me the same tone. The way the translator said it.
Today we remember everyone who fell during Second World War. The sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers, husbands, wives, brothers, and sisters, relatives and friends. We remember those who died in the Second World War. And now we remember the ones who died because of new neo-Nazis.
Ah, there we go.
He's referring to Ukraine, obviously.
Yeah, well, you know, there's nothing better than taking old historical trauma to help produce new historical trauma. It's the circle of life. Trauma, the life of trauma.
And now he's giving the 1 minute of silence. But basically, yeah, we remember the past, we remember our heroes, we remember our grandparents, great-grandparents, and unfortunately now everything the same is happening. Unfortunately, right now the Nazis are again back in Europe under the commandment of you-know-who, sponsored by the West. And right now, just like in the past, just like during Great Patriotic War, right now it is our duty to resist Nazis again. The history repeats itself, he's saying. I mean, right now is the minute of silence, I'm just summarizing the speech.
Yo, we should do this moving forward. Like, people talk about the anger of comparing every conflict in war to World War II. You know, I hear that, like, that complaint all the time from, like, either people in the libertarian crowd, the isolationist crowd, or just people who generally, no matter what the war is, are not happy with it being compared to World War II. And I do think that World War II comparisons are overused. I do largely think they're being overused because many people don't know of wars outside of World War II, so you got to meet people where they are. But I will say the kings of World War II comparisons, hands down, are the Russians. Every war is World War II, revamped, especially this one.
So right now it is our duty, just like our great-grandfathers did before us. Now it is our duty to save the world from neo-Nazis and fascists in Europe, sponsored by the West. So yeah, that's what he said. Now is the minute of silence. After this, he will continue the speech. And here is Lukashenko, the president of Belarus.
I will say, my favorite part of the Putin speech was the minute of silence, when he stopped talking. Next time they should make it an hour of
the
silence.
Speech will continue the second part. Dear friends, veterans, Victory Day is always an emotional holiday. Every family has a hero. They see the old photo albums. They remember the stories of their great parents whenever they were fighting in this war. And this victory we were able to achieve, it unites all the generations. I'm sure that together we will be able to provide security and freedom for Russia. Our common union goal. Glory to the armed forces of Russia.
Wonder how they lost their freedom
For
in
Russia,
Ukraine.
For victory, hooray. And now soldiers will say hooray, as you can hear.
Hoorah!
3 times hooray. Now is the anthem of Russia, and howitzers shooting. Most likely they will be sent to the front lines within the next several weeks because of the extreme lack of the equipment.
Damn, this commentator pulling no punches. Don't fire too many of the
And
shells. You need to use
Putin
those.
Not even Koch any single time. And now, supposedly, I mean not supposed, but now after the anthem, the parade will begin.
So that was the speech. That was Putin's speech this year. It was, honestly, it was really toned down, much shorter than last year's speech. Last year's speech went on and on and on. It got to the point a lot quicker. I prefer it this way. Like, this speech was basically like, we beat the Nazis, woohoo, Ukraine's Nazi too, we need to beat them too, holla holla at your boy. That was Putin's speech, to shorten it in a unique way. I mean, it was the same as you would expect at this point. I don't think the Russians are going to convince anyone new with this. I think this was just kind of Putin going through the motions. And when you see how the parade went and how there was less tanks, there was less soldiers, there was more fear about drone attacks. When you put all this together, it seems like they were just generally going through the motions. I'm interested to see, I mean, I hope the war's over by then, but I'm also a realist. I'm interested to see how it's going to look a year from now if you have another year's worth of casualties. I'm sure they'll keep bringing out the same one tank. I don't think we're going to be seeing any more tanks in these parades anytime soon. But I wonder if we're going to see like a shortage of BMPs and armored vehicles. I doubt it. You have quite a lot of BMPs and different type of miscellaneous armor vehicles in Russia. If they're in a situation where they can't even get a bunch of armored cars to do a parade, then the situation is, I think, too bad to the point that we won't be able to ignore it. But, I mean, I guess this is the rhythm of the Victory Day parade now. Yay, Victory Day. We won in World War II. This is basically World War II again, but they're Ukrainian this time. We need to find and fight our freedom for our freedoms, which we all somehow misplaced in Ukraine. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. I mean, it's basic. It's straight to the point. It's preferable to a 1-hour history rant on Tucker Carlson's show or his dumb, knuckle-dragging historical essays. So I guess I prefer this. Hurrah.